This is a warning. Don't take what doesn't belong to you. My mistake as a teenager has ruined my life. When I was 16, my family moved to a new town because my dad landed a better paying job. We'd been struggling financially for years, so when the tech company called him with an offer, he accepted immediately. 2 weeks later, we left our hometown in Oregon. Saying goodbye to the friends I'd known since birth was tough, but my mom reassured me it was for the best. Our new home was a small town in Washington, about 2 hours away. As we drove past the sign that read, "Welcome to Maple Falls," where memories are made, I had no idea this place would become my personal hell. Maple Falls looked like a ghost town with its dirt roads and old houses. Our new home wasn't much to look at either. It was painted dark green with a gray roof and matching door. Inside, it had 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and all the usual amenities. A few days after moving in, I discovered we had an attic, thanks to a chain hanging from the ceiling in the laundry room. Excited, I told my mom, who seemed puzzled because the previous owner hadn't mentioned it. My dad had left his ladders behind when he switched jobs, so we found one in the garage. Mom set it up, climbed halfway, and then stopped, hesitating. "Mom, what are you doing? Pull it down so I can see what's up there. I don't think it's safe. Maybe the previous owner didn't mention it for a reason. It could be dangerous. He might have left some old things up there, like antiques." She sighed deeply. "Fine, but if you get hurt, you're never going up there again." In my excitement, I pulled the rusty chain, and the attic entrance opened, sending a cloud of dust into my face. I coughed, but my curiosity pushed me on. I climbed up into the eerie attic. "I don't see anything," Mom called up. "Not yet. I haven't turned on the light," I replied. I fumbled around, found the switch, and lit up the attic. The floral wallpaper was peeling, and the floor needed sweeping, but otherwise it was in good condition. Apart from some boxes of porcelain plates, teacups, and old frilly dresses, there wasn't much up there. Then I saw a beautiful antique mirror with bright gold edges. It looked like something out of a fairy tale. I had to have it. The owner had left it behind, so it was technically mine, right? I carried it down carefully. "What's that?" Mom asked. "An old mirror." "It's beautiful, and I want to put it in my room," I said excitedly. She examined it. "It needs cleaning, but sure. Just remember, we don't know whose it is." I squealed with joy and rushed to clean the mirror. But no matter what I used, Windex, soap, vinegar, baby wipes, the smudges wouldn't come off. Frustrated, I asked Mom for advice. "It's really old, honey. It might be stains inside the glass," she suggested. "Should I just hang it up as it is sure it's clean enough?" I took it to my room and hung it over my bed. Despite the smudges, it still gleamed beautifully. That night I fell asleep admiring it, but then the nightmares began. A cryptid crawled out of the walls, choking me with burning hands. I couldn't scream. I woke up in a panic, drenched in sweat. The smell of the creature was etched into my memory. I showered and spent the rest of the night drawing to avoid sleeping. The nightmares continued every night, and I became desperate. I sought help online, but everyone kept asking if I had any mirrors in my room. I thought it was a silly question until someone told me to burn it, claiming it had negative energy. I laughed it off, but as I examined the mirror more closely, I realized the smudges were inside the glass. Panic set in. Could this be real? Lack of sleep made me paranoid, but the nightmares persisted. I finally told my mom everything, but she dismissed it, blaming my imagination. One night after another nightmare, I woke up with a dry throat and brushed my teeth, only to spit out black. My mouth was covered in dust. The warnings were right, it was evil. I decided to get rid of the mirror. In the morning, I smashed it to pieces outside. The relief was immediate. But when I returned to my room, the mirror was back on the wall, whole again. The shards outside had vanished. Since then, the mirror has followed me everywhere, haunting every house I've moved to. I regret ever taking it. It's ruined my life, isolating me from friends and making me feel insane. The mirror and its nightmares are a curse that I fear will follow me even in death. So heed my warning, curiosity killed the cat. We had always lived at 312 Oakwood Avenue, so there was never a time I didn't hear the creature. It had been living in the attic above my room since I was born. When I was very young, I thought it was my friend. I would knock on the ceiling and it would knock back. I would giggle and it would mumble words I couldn't understand. I thought it was there to protect me from my nightmares. But as I got older, I started to be afraid. My parents insisted there wasn't anything in the attic. Over time, I realized it wasn't my friend at all. That's when the scratching, moaning, and sporadic banging began to scare me. When I was 8, I finally broke down and told my parents about the creature in the attic. I was terrified it would come down one night and kill me. My mother rolled her eyes and told me it was just squirrels. She never listened to me anyway. My father agreed with her but hugged me and told me he would protect me and not to be scared. So from then on, whenever I heard the noises, I would scream for my father, and he would come running into my room less than a minute later to see what the matter was. I would point at the ceiling and cower. My dad would smile, bang on the ceiling with his fist, and say, "Quiet down up there," or else the noise would stop. I'd give my dad a teary smile, and he would hug me. He was always my protector. I miss him so much now. As I matured into a teenager, I started inviting my friends to sleep over. They didn't believe my stories at first, but after one night in my room, they were convinced. We called ourselves the Oakwood Avenue Ghostbusters and spent hours trying to exorcise the entity, a demon, according to our research through awkward seances and Ouija boards. We decided that the scratching must be the creature etching satanic sigils into the attic floor. One slumber party, running on heightened bravado and caffeine, I waited until the familiar scratching started and pounded on the ceiling, just like my dad. I quiet down up there, or else you already dead. The living are trying to sleep. We giggled and my friends were impressed for a moment. I should have known not to provoke it. Suddenly there was an answering enraged banging on the ceiling, louder than I'd ever heard, and a sort of angry yelling. We all screamed and hid in the closet, yelling for my dad. When he came running, my friends begged him to take them home. I was left alone while they were gone. I could feel it, almost see it impatiently pacing above me, just inches of wood and plaster between us. I was so scared that I stayed hidden in the closet. Then the scratching started again. That was when I realized what it was doing. It was trying to carve its way through the ceiling and into my room. I whimpered at the thought, and then the scratching stopped and the banging resumed on the ceiling. It didn't stop again until the headlights of my dad's car lit up my room. I cried until my dad, always the hero, came sprinting into my room and banged on the ceiling. "It's still in the attic, Dad," I wailed. He nodded, gave me a pitying look, and pounded his fist on the ceiling. "Quiet down up there or else." Then he held me, let me cry out my fears, and told me it was okay if I slept on the sofa that night. Sometimes I thought he believed it was all in my head, but it wasn't. The murmurs, the knocking, and the scratching, I'd been hearing it all my life. It was real, but if he didn't believe, he never let on and never made me feel crazy. He just played along. I guess I never really understood my dad. One night when I was 16, I was awoken by an otherworldly, ear-splitting scream. It was so loud, so high, and so piercing that I screamed as well, in terror. The scream ended abruptly, and a moment later my dad came running in. "You heard it," I cried as my body racked with sobs. "How could you not hear it? You had to have heard it." "Oh, sweetie," my dad sat at the end of my bed, his hair disheveled and a far-off look in his middle-of-the-night, bloodshot eyes. "Of course I heard it, but it was just an owl. I'm sure of it. We've been seeing a few in the neighborhood." "No, Dad, listen to the attic, Clara." "Please, Dad." "Jane." He sighed but nodded, and we sat and listened for a while. I needed my dad to know the truth and to finally believe me. We were all in danger, but no more sounds came from the attic that night. I didn't hear it again after that, not for a long time. The ceiling suddenly felt empty to me for the first time in my life. Maybe it was dormant, or maybe it had been called back to hell. But either way, I knew it would be back. Oddly, when the creature did return, I didn't really notice at first. After 16 years, it was simply white noise to me, a background soundtrack as familiar to me as my own face. It took so long for me to process that it was back that I can't put my finger on when it actually started. I think that's what sealed our fates in the end. The noises were just so inherent to me that I failed to understand how unusual they really were and had been all along. When I finally did realize what I was hearing, I'm ashamed to say I felt almost relieved. The haunt progressed in the same cycle it had all my life. First the groans, then the banging, then light, lazy tapping, and then, finally, the scratching, always the scratching. I told my dad about the scratching and about how I thought the creature was trying to rip through the ceiling and into my room. My dad laughed and told me there were 3 inches of solid metal up there, and that nothing, not squirrels, raccoons, feral cats, or even ghosts could come through. And he should know he built the house himself. And besides, he assured me he would always be there to protect me. But in the end, he wasn't. Since I was moving out in a year, I decided I had no choice but to just stick it out. After 16 years with it, what was 12 more months? I grew unconcerned, lazy, and complacent. I ignored the noises, even started to bang back again. I used logic to pacify my fear, whatever it was. It couldn't come through the ceiling. If it could, it would have done so years ago. And I sensed that more than anything else in the world, it wanted out. And since it was still up there, obviously it was trapped. And I was right. The night the door was opened is the most vivid memory I have. I was at a friend's house when my mother called me and told me to come home immediately. This in itself was strange, as my mother barely even acknowledged me and never, ever called me. I drove the 5 miles back to my neighborhood, but I had a hard time getting in. I started to panic as I desperately weaved through all the media vans, police cars, and SWAT trucks. I had to park and walk the final 3 blocks to my house, tears rolling down my cheeks as I realized that my street was at the epicenter of it all, because I knew. As soon as I saw my house, I realized that my dad must be dead. It had finally gotten out, and it had killed my dad. I took off at a dead run then, ignoring all the voices yelling at me to stop. I dodged between the vehicles, pushing past dozens of people, ran through the crime scene tape, and directly into my house, and there it was. Across from the living room, next to my bedroom, the hall closet stood with its door open. All the jackets and sweaters had been pulled out of it, and on the back wall, I saw at another door. For whatever reason, no one stopped me. I stumbled into the closet, through the hidden door, and out into the attic I'd always known was there, but it wasn't what I thought it'd be. The media called my dad the butcher of Oakwood Avenue, and from what I saw in that attic, it was a very fitting name. There were knives, all sorts really, and there were metal devices stacked along one wall, at least 100 of them. Most I didn't recognize, but a few I had seen in history books. There were 4 sets of manacles, a wall of chains, and rolls of duct tape. In the middle of the room, there was a flat table, which was very clearly blood-soaked. A tall stool sat at the head of the table. But the worst of it was the wall, my ceiling. Every inch of it was covered in carvings. But the carvings weren't satanic or evil like I'd thought. The carvings were words. Jacob, I love you. Diana Hobb. Tell my father I forgive him. Brian Woodland. Tara, I'm so sorry. Michael McNulty. Tell my daughters they were my world. Angela Waterstone. According to the evidence file, there were over 60 of these messages, and I made myself read every single one. They haunt me every night. I had spent 10 years tormenting them, and they would now forever torment me. I live in a hospital now, and I can still hear the scratching. Every time I close my eyes, I hear it. I haven't really slept in a year. My doctor says if I don't sleep soon, I'll die. I spend my days watching news coverage of my father's trial, and I spend my nights staring at the walls. The drugs don't work, but they keep giving them to me anyway. And though I try every night, I can never fall asleep. I always hear the scratching, and I always will.